United States and Russia have entered uncharted territory now that their last remaining nuclear arms control agreement has expired.
This is a really important part of the nuclear order and reducing nuclear risks.
The uncertain future of nuclear arms control. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Also today, an update from Sudan, where famine conditions are getting worse.
Where is the world really? The world that woke up to Darfur crisis 22 years ago.
We'll also hear about new gun laws in Australia and the Olympic sport of curling, which is really pretty simple.
Yeah, you're hurling big rocks down a sheet of ice and trying to get them to stop in the right place.
But where do curling and its rocks come from? That's all ahead on today's edition of The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for tuning in. Today, the last remaining nuclear arms control treaty between the U.S. and Russia has expired. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START as it's called, was signed in 2010. It followed a landmark speech in Prague 1 year earlier by President Barack Obama.
I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons.
The combined nuclear stockpiles of the United States and Russia account for nearly 90% of all nuclear weapons on Earth. Starting today, the two countries lack any legal limits on these weapons for the first time in more than half a century. Heather Williams is the director of the Project on Nuclear Issues at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I started by asking her what the New START treaty actually accomplished.
It's led to some really significant reductions in Russian and American operationally deployed strategic forces. It set limits at 1,550 warheads, 700 delivery vehicles. And it also had this really important inspection mechanism. One of the great things that arms control can bring is transparency, opportunities for cooperation. And so there were over 300 inspections under this treaty, along with regular dialogue going on. I think the final thing that I would point to about the significance of it is that New START was carrying on this kind of arms control legacy that really began in the late 1960s and the 1970s at the height of the Cold War, where it tried to put some restraints on the Soviets and the Russians and the United States to reduce the risks of nuclear use, to reduce the risks of nuclear escalation, and to reduce the risks of arms racing, really. So the treaty really has achieved a lot since it was concluded in 2010.
So in terms of those inspections, Russian officials could inspect U.S. weapons and weapon sites and vice versa?
That's right. The important thing about arms control, and especially inspections, is the reciprocity behind it. That arms control, it's not some gift that the United States gives away. We get something in return. We allow Russians in to look at some of our systems and some of our capabilities. We also have these dialogues with them where we can talk about why are we doing what we're doing. So that can reduce risks of misperception. But we get the same with the Russians as well. We got to go into some Russian pretty secretive facilities to see their nuclear capabilities as well. Now, it's important to stress, however, that Russia suspended those inspections back in 2022. And of course, Vladimir Putin put an offer on the table to continue to observe New START beyond its expiration. But that didn't include those inspections or verification activities. And so to some extent, I think that offer wasn't really done in good faith because it didn't come with that inspection regime, which is so important.
Russia said it was willing to re-up New START for a year. Why is the U.S. not responding to that offer from the Kremlin?
The message that I'm picking up from the Trump administration is because it doesn't include China. The president has said on multiple occasions that he wants, quote unquote, denuclearization talks with Russia and China, but he always says Russia and China together and in tandem. And that is because China has so rapidly advanced and built up its own nuclear forces. They have sprinted to 600 weapons now. They are expanding their arsenal at a rate of 20% a year. So that's really the fastest buildup that we've seen. They're projected to have 1,000 warheads by 2030. And so from the U.S. perspective, any agreement that doesn't include China really doesn't get us all of those benefits of arms control that we have in terms of transparency into adversary arsenals, but also putting some restraint on all three major parties.
So China, where does China stand on arms control agreements like New START? Like, could they potentially be a new partner in an updated version of New START?
There's two answers to this question. First, when it comes to arms control like New START, things like those bilateral agreements, limitations, reductions, on-site inspections, consultations, China consistently says absolutely not. Their reason for that is that US and Russian arsenals are just so much bigger than theirs. They also have suggested that other small countries might have to be part of any negotiation. So that would probably be the United Kingdom or France. Russia has also consistently said that the UK and France need to be part of any future arms control dialogue. But for this type of legacy arms control, China has just across the board been really reluctant and not engaged. The other type of arms control, though, which is a bit different from New START, it's multilateral nuclear diplomacy. So these really big treaties like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which have, 190 members or close to that. And in those forums, China's a really active participant. They have, in recent years, used these forums to advance their wolf warrior diplomacy in a nuclear form to some extent. But so in those forums, China's really active, but they're using it for disinformation purposes. And they aren't using those forums to talk about reductions or to talk about transparency. If you bring up transparency with the Chinese, they usually want to end the conversation pretty quickly. So in terms of what comes next, China is the really hard piece to this. Russia obviously has suggested an interest. I'm not sure how we rebuild trust with the Russians, but with China, we're kind of starting from scratch.
I'm speaking with Heather Williams at the Center for Strategic and International Studies about the end of the New START nuclear arms control agreement. What are your concerns, Heather, about not having a treaty at all among these three great powers?
It is the end of an era, but it's not the end of arms control. I am primarily worried about the loss of transparency and dialogue opportunities with the Russians. When the treaty was working, it was a really great tool for being able to sit down with the Russians, especially if there was any sort of discrepancies in reporting. If we picked up some sort of evidence that they might be in violation of something, then you can sit down with them and talk about it privately. It also helped build personal relationships, quite frankly. Arms control is also built on interpersonal dialogue and relationships. And it's the loss of that that does worry me, because there will come another time for arms control, but we need the relationships and we need the people who can do it. With the end of New START, we could be losing a lot of tacit knowledge and a lot of those pre-existing relationships that go into this in the future.
Heather, remind us what the basic idea is behind nuclear deterrence.
Nuclear deterrence is the threat that something really bad will happen if you take an action that I don't want you to take. I have been told that this is a very common practice with children, saying, if you do A, B will happen. So you're trying to stop something bad from happening in the first place. And nuclear deterrence has been the foundation of nuclear strategy since the dawn of the atomic age, really, and since the Soviet Union developed their own nuclear weapons program in 1949. As long as the US and the Soviets were the main competitors, that's how we've always thought about nuclear deterrence, as in that kind of stable bilateral relationship. But with the rise of China and all those concerns that I just listed, it's creating a new deterrence balance that we're still trying to figure out how to address that. And what does that mean for U.S. strategic forces? Does the United States need some sort of a nuclear buildup? I argue that we do not need a massive buildup, but we do need a strategy that can drive what comes next for our nuclear forces.
As we are talking, Heather, News from Axios quoting sources, unnamed sources, that the U.S. and Russia are looking to observe New START after expiration. Obviously, this is coming out of a meeting over the war in Ukraine in Abu Dhabi, I believe. What do you make of this?
I'm not massively surprised by it, to be honest. I know that in earlier iterations of the Ukraine talks, there had been some attempts to make nuclear arms control part of that deal. Obviously, the Russians would want that to be part of the deal. And the Trump administration prides itself on being good negotiators. And if extending the New START limits gives them some sort of negotiating leverage, then, that doesn't really surprise me and to some extent makes sense. Just another observation on this, though, just because New START ended today or midnight last night doesn't mean that the option of continuing to observe the limits is completely off the table. Trump could come back in 2 weeks from now and say, I've thought about it and I actually think this is a good deal and we are going to observe the New START central limits. It might mean that there is some minor gap in observing those limits, but there was also a gap when START 1 ended before the New START was in place in 2009. So it's not totally unprecedented. But I would come back to where we started and stress that needs to include verification of some sort, and the Russians have not put that on the table. If the Trump administration can get the Russians to agree to a return to inspections for that additional year, I think that would be a really big win.
Arms control by definition has to follow a logic, as you've been explaining. So how do arms control experts factor in, like, the occasional salvo of threats from Putin to use nuclear weapons in his war against Ukraine when you're thinking about future arms control deals? Like, how do you factor in any leader's madman approach where it's uncertain what they might do?
You asked about arms control experts, and we're a pretty diverse group. Some people in the arms control community take a somewhat absolutist approach in which arms control is supposed to be about disarmament. And for them, seeing or hearing Putin's nuclear threats, they would probably argue that's all the more evidence about why we need to work towards total nuclear elimination. As long as these weapons exist, there's a threat that they will be used. And that's what we should be focusing on, is their elimination. I'm probably more on a slightly more pragmatic, some might call cynical side of the arms control community. And I would instead argue that arms control is not going to solve all of your problems. Arms control is about managing competition, sometimes a very narrow part of that competition. Those treaties and those agreements, though, they're still really beneficial because you can at least try to manage competition in the most destructive capability.
So earlier we heard former President Barack Obama famously in a speech in Prague in 2009. This is in the lead up to signing New START in 2010. He spoke about, quote, peace and security in a world without nuclear weapons. Where does that goal stand now?
It does look like we are further away from that goal now than when Obama made that speech in 2009. That is both because of the war in Ukraine, because of Russian and Chinese buildups and their regional ambitions. The United States, I think, took Obama's vision quite seriously. It wasn't just about New START. There were also nuclear security summits. There was the elimination of some nuclear platforms. There were really good faith efforts at arms control. The Biden administration made at least 4 pretty serious attempts to engage the Russians in dialogue, and the Russians rebuffed all of those. The Chinese met for one arms control dialogue and said, no, we don't want any more of this. And so it's not for lack of trying that we have ended up where we are, but it does seem like the risks of nuclear use are rising, and the prospects for Obama's vision, unfortunately, are not looking very positive in the short term, at least.
Heather Williams is a nuclear expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She spoke with us from Boston. And now let's catch you up on a few things you might have missed.
An Indian teacher named Rubal Nagi was just awarded the Global Teacher Prize. That is a $1 million award given by the Varkey Foundation, an international education nonprofit. It goes to teachers who make outstanding contributions in their field. Nagi herself leads an organization that has set up more than 800 learning centers across India. They provide education for kids who've never attended formal schools.
Guinea worm is on track to become the second disease to be completely eradicated in humans. Only 10 cases were recorded in 2025. That is the lowest ever, according to the Carter Center. The U.S. nonprofit was set up by the late President Jimmy Carter, who helped lead the global effort to eliminate guinea worm.
In Japan, the city of Fujiyoshida has canceled this year's Cherry Blossom Festival. Badly behaved tourists are to blame. The city is considered one of the best places in Japan to experience the spring festival. Its clear view of Mount Fuji makes the place a picture-perfect background during the height of cherry blossom season. Maybe a little too perfect. The city has seen a spike in visitors trespassing on private property looking for a bathroom, as well as a surge in littering and overcrowding.
And that is a few things you might have missed.
You are listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The opening ceremony for the 2026 Winter Olympics is tomorrow night in Milan, Italy. But for some athletes, it is already go time.
The United States come up with a victory in their first Olympic competition in a round-robin.
A big day for USA curling today. The mixed doubles team defeated Norway, the defending silver medalists. To celebrate curling then, as the first event played at this year's Olympics, reporter Bianca Hillier decided to look into the origins of one central piece of curling equipment.
When you break it down, the goal of curling is really very simple, says Jonathan Hearn, president of the North End Curling Club in Boston.
Yeah, you're hurling big rocks down a sheet of ice and trying to get them to stop in the right place.
The equipment is pretty pared down too. Sure, the pros get fancy with special shoes and gloves, but it all revolves around the curling stone.
In the old days, they tried to use anything they could dig out the ground.
Lindsay Scotland is a lifelong curler from Edinburgh.
But granite started to become the obvious thing because you can shape it and it keeps its shape.
Scotland has become a historian of the sport, which originated in the country of Scotland back in the 1500s. He says over the centuries, the granite used to make curling stones has come from different quarries around the UK because they each provide different kinds of granite.
Some ran better on the ice and some didn't. Some were more fragile and brittle than the others. These days, most of the curling stones comes from a place called Ailsa Craig.
Ailsa Craig is a small island about 10 nautical miles off the west coast of Scotland. Nobody lives there, except a bunch of seals and birds. But Ricky English knows the island like the back of his hand.
Ailsa Craig itself is an old volcanic plug, so the rock itself is probably about 60 million years old.
English works for a company called Kays Scotland, which has been using Ailsa Craig's granite to make curling stones for 175 years. Granite from the south side of the island, called common green, is used for the body of the curling stone. That's the part you can see when it's gliding across the ice. This particular kind of granite is known for its high elasticity.
So when the two stones hit together, instead of them shattering on impact, it kind of absorbs that energy.
The bottom of the curling stone is made of granite from the north side of the island. It's called blue hone, and it serves its own specific purpose.
It's very, very hard wearing, which makes it perfect for running across the ice because the ice is an abrasive surface.
Together, the two types of granite make the perfect curling stone, tipping the scale around 40 pounds each. They're considered the gold standard in the sport, and that's why they're the only curling stones allowed at the sport's biggest competitions, like the World Championships and the Olympics.
Yep. Yep. Four. Yep. Janet. Okay.
For the upcoming games, Kays Scotland has sent 132 curling stones to Italy, according to English. He says he's always proud to see the company's stones on the world stage, and for that matter, on any old ice around the world.
Our biggest market's obviously Canada. They love curling over there. Asia's probably second to that. China, Japan. I even sent 2 stones to Antarctica, and that's no a joke.
Curling in Antarctica. Why not? Because wherever there's ice, there's a curling stone from a small island off the coast of Scotland.
All the way, all the way, all the way, all the way! Yes, yes, yes! Oh, yes!
For The World, I'm Bianca Hillier.
Good shot.
So, as we just heard from Bianca, the sport of curling got its start back in the 1500s in Scotland. But the residents of one small mountain village in Spain like to say that they were the first to curl. They say a lot of things, actually, as the world's Jerry Haddon first reported in 2024 from Vallvidrera.
Each year, the Vallvidrera Curling Club season kicks off with a ritual, the tossing of the stone onto the ice of the local reservoir. If the ice doesn't crack, it's firm enough to play on.
Estimats currilencs, és un gran honor per jo.
Masters of Ceremony Jesus Escardo and team members stand on a wooden platform 15 feet above the reservoir. There's a huge team flag, blue sweatshirts for uniforms, but something's off, says Escardo solemnly, stone in hand.
Avui us vull dir que la pena la ràbia i el desencís.
I am consumed by sadness today, by ire and disappointment, he says. We've been deprived of cold weather yet again. And with that, Escardo turns, as his ancestors allegedly have for nearly 5 centuries, and lobs the stone over the water. The ice does not crack. The stone lands in the shallow water at the reservoir's edge. This pond-sized body of water has never frozen, ever. The curling club of Vidrera we carry in our hearts goes the club anthem since 1540, with brooms we sweat up here at the reservoir. 1540, exactly 1 year, allegedly, before the Scots skidded their first stone. To find out how we know this, I turn to the club's official historian, Salvador Samayuk.
Sí, hay fotos, ¿eh? Justo sí, aquí hay una foto de gente jugando aquí, por eso sabemos.
Because there's a photo, he tells me, of people playing right here on the reservoir, people with brooms in their hands. If it's not clear yet that this curling club is a farce, well, it is. The photograph from 1540, lots of cool stuff happened during the Renaissance, but photography wasn't one of them. The whole thing's a gag, and a really good one, actually, for 2 reasons. First, because since the joke began 15 years ago, no one has ever slipped out of character.
Pues imaginar, mentalmente somos los mejores porque, fíjate, ¿quién estaría 15 años seguidos entrenando, esperando la posibilidad de jugar?
Mentally, we're the strongest team out there, says curler Joan Balcells, dressed in uniform. Just imagine, a decade and a half of physical preparation, he says, 3 times a week. I'm sure, he says, that we could beat Finland or Sweden. But perhaps the real reason this make-believe tradition prevails year after year is because of what follows the ceremony.
Avui no ens queda un altre cantar el nostre himne centenari.
We still have our centuries-old hymn to sing, says Escardo to the apparently disappointed crowd. And after that, he says, in order to get over this difficult moment, brunch. Brunch, brunch, chants the crowd. So that's the plan. It's been the plan all along. The neighbors carry their flag down to a local restaurant, order up a ton of food on this sunny, warm March morning.
Un brindis pel curling club Vidrera. Jugarem! Jugarem!
A toast to the club, says one member. We will play one day. I take a seat at the long table, drawn in by the good neighborliness and mirth. An elderly curler seated next to me, Montse Catala, tells me this year was looking good. The weather report said it was going to snow, she sighs, but look how it worked out. She raises her beer with a wink and a smile. For the world, I'm Cherry Haddon, Vidrera, Spain.
Just ahead, walking around the world alone, but sometimes you get a walking partner who's more than just company. That and more stories coming your way. Stay with us. You're with the world.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Famine is spreading in the western Darfur region of Sudan. That's according to a group that monitors global hunger. The civil war in Sudan erupted in April of 2023, and the situation in Darfur is becoming more and more difficult as famine conditions have now reached 2 more towns. Jan Egeland is the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He just returned from a trip to Sudan, where he spent time in South Kordofan, which he says is seriously overlooked.
In South Kordofan, where we also have a war between the government forces and the Rapid Support Forces and the SPLAN forces, the civilian population is suffering beyond belief, and there is very little support for these women and children who are fleeing for their life and who are now in a huge hunger catastrophe.
So the fighting is happening both in Darfur and in South Kordofan between the government forces and these militias you mentioned. You know, obviously that impacts hunger, but what exactly is fueling the spread of famine itself, this most extreme version of hunger in that area?
Well, famine has been declared in the city of Kadugli. Similar to Al-Fashar in North Darfur, Kadugli has been besieged. The government army has resupplied recently, but that was mostly a military convoy. We, as humanitarians, have not been able to send humanitarian aid for many months. So people have to flee to get food. And I met many who fled from Kadugli, and they were mostly mothers with small children, because the men were either dead or they were missing or they were forced to stay behind. And these mothers are getting very little attention. I think we have 5 international NGOs there to help the courageous local responders.
When you were meeting and speaking with these people who had fled the besieged city, famine has a technical definition, but what does that actually look like on the ground for the people experiencing it? What does that feel like?
That your children die because they cannot sustain any disease. So the diarrhea, any pneumonia kills the children that are in a famine. The grown-ups become very weak. One woman told me she fled in the late morning because the house was torched by a drone that sent explosives against their home. She fled with her nursing baby on her arm and small children, walked for 2-3 days, but there is no real attention globally for this, the largest humanitarian emergency on Earth.
I was struck today to read that, famine has only officially been declared a few times in recent memory by the kind of official body that does this. So this is, so significant.
It is, because I'm old enough to remember the Band-Aid days of the 1980s and 90s, where there was recurrent famines. The humanitarian system have become much more effective and efficient in recent decades, and we have been able to avert famine again and again. But there has been a famine declared in Al-Fasher, Darfur, in Kadugli, South Kordofan, and is nearly always related to conflict, where humanitarians are prevented from coming with the food that is needed.
So that points to an answer to this question, but what needs to happen for this famine to be put to an end, for aid to be able to get into these places under siege?
Most fundamentally, we need an end to the senseless war between generals and armed groups. Secondly, we need much bigger resources. I mean, the United States, Europe, Gulf countries have cut their aid of late. In a situation when needs are exploding. In South Kordofan, it's a countdown to a much bigger famine, potentially, because we have 3 months to pre-position food, surge aid before the rainy season, when these roads, which are really tracks in the terrain, those tracks will become impossible during the rainy season, and that starts at the end of April.
You have been doing this work for a while, and I imagine you've been to a lot of places in very tough times. How does this compare to what you've seen over your career?
Yeah, I've been a humanitarian worker for 40 years now. But I must say, I have never, in my many, many years, seen such a gap between available aid and the needs on the ground. Where is the world really? And the world that woke up to Darfur crisis 22 years ago, and where President Bush and Prime Minister Blair and the EU Commission, the German Chancellor, was seized with Darfur at the time. You may remember George Clooney brought the world press to Darfur. Now it's a much bigger emergency in Sudan. And we get much less attention. Where has the war gone? Really, it's America first, it's Europe first, it's my national interest first, not humanities first anymore.
I was going to ask you why this change in international attention. Is that the main driver, you think? Countries are looking within their own borders instead of without now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good time. We are not true to our ideals with all of this nationalism and inwards looking.
I did want to get a bit of an update on the conflict that is driving all of this, of course. The last major point in this conflict that I think a lot of people in the West were paying attention to was when the RSF took the city of El Fasher, which is sort of one of the capital of North Darfur. You have now been speaking about a different region, South Kordofan. How has the fighting progressed since El Fasher fell?
It's just continued. More and more trench warfare. Half of the country being now divided between these armed actors. And it will mean that a whole generation of children will be starving and will be lost.
One final question before we say goodbye. You have mentioned why you think there is so little international attention on this conflict and the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. What needs to happen to change that?
Well, I think we, as a humanitarian organization, frontline responders, we need to be better also explaining that we can change things. We can win the battle against famine. I am hopeful for the future. I mean, I think we need to realize that hope. And that's the only way these mothers and our children will stay and build society. We want to give them hope where they are.
Jan Egeland is the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He recently returned from a visit to Sudan.
If you're a regular listener of the show, then Paul Salopek needs no introduction. If you don't know Paul, he's a National Geographic explorer on a 21,000-mile journey across the globe on foot. The Out of Eden Walk is the name of the project. It would not actually be possible without some help along the way. Paul has been joined by dozens of walking partners. They serve as interpreters and translators, local guides, and sometimes just some much-needed company. Paul Salopek joined me recently to talk about how those walking partners keep him moving. I started by asking him how many he's had over the years.
Over 80, between 80 and 90 so far.
Wow. How do you find these people?
You know, the old-fashioned way, the pre-digital way, it's word of mouth. If I'm walking through Uzbekistan and the next country is Kyrgyzstan, I ask my Uzbek friends and walking partners, hey, do you know anybody over the border? Any friends, any relatives? And so I'm being passed kind of by hand to hand. It's kind of nice this way.
Are there qualities that you look for or hope for in the ideal walking partner?
Yeah, it's this combination of body and mind, right? I'm not a super athlete. This project isn't a reality show about survivalism, but you do have to have basic fitness, right? So I ask that people, make sure they have no medical conditions and that they've kind of a base level of physical shape. And then on the other side, they have to be like a journalist. They have to be curious. They can't be too shy. And they can't have kind of biases or grudges that would limit them to talking to only certain people in their communities. They have to be able to talk to everybody, just like you and I do.
Is that first day with a walking partner almost like an audition? Like if they make it through the first day and you're not like at each other's throats by the end of the day, you can go on to the second day?
This is slow journalism, Marco, so I give them at least a week. First day is kind of just kind of like whatever happens. It's an easy one. But yeah, give them 5-6 days to see how their knees are treating them, how the personalities are working, if they're enjoying themselves. Yeah, it takes a little time.
And how long typically have you spent with your walking partners?
Gosh, I mean, one that stands out that was very short was a Turkish waiter who saw that my quote-unquote official walking partner was kind of out of commission. He had too many blisters on his feet. He needed a break. So this young guy who was wearing the Turkish waiter outfit, a white shirt, a black vest, black pants and black street shoes with a little white towel over his arm said, hey, I'll walk with you today. I mean, and he did. He crossed a mountain with me wearing his uniform.
Wow.
It goes from that, like just kind of pick up one day, half a day, to walking partners who walked with me for thousands of kilometers. My Kurdish walking partner in Anatolia, asked to join for about 3 or 4 days. He ended up walking for 7 months.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was going to ask you, did you ever just meet someone like as you were walking through a village who was really curious by what you were up to and said, you know what, I'm hanging with you for a while?
Yeah, that does happen. And it's kind of cool. I mean, those kind of pickup walking partners, if you will, add a deep layer of richness because they're from that place. They know it well. Could be a valley somewhere. And they'll walk with me. I might be still walking with another, like if I'm walking in China, I might have a walking partner that's been with me for weeks. But then some farmer says, hey, it's great what you guys are doing. Let me take you down this river valley. I'll show you where I grew up. I show you where my grandparents' house is. It's this great collective, communal kind of act of discovery.
So these walking partners have helped you get from point A to point B. They're kind of impromptu guides and translators. Beyond that, though, how have they been helpful in ways that maybe you were not expecting?
It started out at the beginning, just like, you've been around the block, Marco. You go to a country to cover a breaking news story. Often you liaise with a local colleague, right? That's the way I sort of conceptualize this, except they would be walking, right, instead of in a rent-a-car at the airport. But it has evolved over the years because we spend so much time together, because walking does something to your head and heart that creates these really tight connections in a short period of time. They literally become like dear friends, and sometimes even as close as family, brothers and sisters. So they don't just provide kind of logistical support, translation. It's a co-discovery journey. And as I've sort of found to my delight, is that for them, it's even more special in many cases than for me, right? Because I'm primed for wonder, the way a journalist is, the way a storyteller. I'm ready to be surprised every day I wake up. But people who are showing you through their home landscapes, for them, they're shocked because they say, Paul, I never knew this was happening in my backyard. I'm kind of seeing my home new again. So the wonder is even bigger for them.
I know psychologists believe that people walking side by side or positioning side by side, you get a different relationship than face to face. It's why psychoanalysts have people lying on the couch not looking at them. Do you feel like your relationships with these walking partners were distinctly different from other relationships you've had?
Well, that's an interesting point. I never heard of that. But it absolutely, in my case, I think I can prove that out over the last 13 years. There's something about kind of matching strides, something, this ancient iambic beat. It's kind of like the beat of a heartbeat that gets, not just your bodies, but also sort of your minds and your psyches in sync. There's a natural, organic ebb and flow of conversation. You can sense when somebody's body is walking near yours, kind of where they are, how tired they are, what their energy levels are. It's a deep connection that I think would be hard to match if you're sitting across a table from somebody, for example.
I wanted to ask you about walking through potential conflict zones. I mean, I can imagine that a walking partner in some situations is crucial, even life-saving. Were there times when you said to yourself, wow, not only is my walking partner a nice person, but I definitely do not want to be here alone?
Yes, of course. And these are situations where you might have your radar on, but you still have blind spots, right? Everybody does. And having somebody local who knows kind of the nuances and the subtleties of local allegiances, right, Marco? You've been through these situations yourself. I've got a funny story to that, exactly to that point. I was walking through Anatolia years ago with Murat Yazar, who's a fantastic documentary.
So this is in Turkey.
This is in Turkey. This was down near the Syrian border, and we got sort of ambushed by a group of villagers, men who are carrying Kalashnikovs, because we had a cargo donkey. We were near the Syrian border. It was back when Kobani was under siege by ISIS. There were a lot of refugees kind of spilling over the border. And these Kurdish people from eastern Turkey thought that we were ISIS. We had our hands up, and they were speaking in Kurdish to us, yelling at us. If Murat hadn't been there to translate, I might have made some misstep that could have got us hurt. The funny part of this is that Murat is a philosophical type. He's kind of an urbanite, a cosmopolitan. And he was yelling stuff back at these guys in Kurdish, and they started getting into an argument. And I elbowed him. I said, what are you doing? Don't argue with these guys. And he said, Paul, they're accusing us of being ISIS. And I told them, how can I be ISIS? I'm an atheist. I don't even believe in the higher being. I turned to Murat. I said, Murat, thank you. You just made it worse. So anyway, your walking partners, you rely on them from everything from your survival to kind of just picking up your mood.
Do any of your past walking partners check in on you, or do you check in on them?
All the time. I keep social media platforms like WhatsApp, and also in China, WeChat. The most walking partners I've walked with in any one country has been China, more than 20. And we keep in constant touch. I don't think 2 days go by without some update from everybody. And it is like a large extended family, a global family. I've seen them kind of grow up. We've grown up together. It's been 13 years. I've seen them get married, get jobs, lose jobs, publish books. I've seen the birth of their babies. It's this wonderful collective global walking family. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you have any plans maybe at some point to see any of your walking partners again?
As a matter of fact, I have a very great plan, and it's going to take a few years to set up. I've got about 3 years of walking still ahead of me. As you know, the destination of the Out of Eden Walk is the tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego.
Right.
My hope is to fly all of my walking partners, going from Ethiopia through the Middle East, through the Caucasus, through Central Asia, to the Far East, to the Americas, fly everybody, and it could be a couple hundred people by the end, to Tierra del Fuego so that we can walk together to the Antarctic Sea. That's the plan.
That is incredible. And as you said that, like the hair on my arm is standing on end. You can't fake that. That would be amazing.
No.
That's National Geographic explorer Paul Salopek. Paul, thank you for walking by our side for the past few minutes. We appreciate it.
Oh, Marco, always a pleasure.
You can check out the 13 years of Paul's journey so far. It's all online at outofelenwalk.nationalgeographic.org. You're with the world.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. To Australia now. It has been nearly 2 months since the shooting rampage at a public celebration of Hanukkah on Bondi Beach. Many people there are still grieving. On Sunday, Israel's President Isaac Herzog will arrive in Sydney to mourn with the local Jewish community. Herzog's visit has sparked tensions in Australia between supporters of Israel and advocates for Palestinian rights. There's also new attention on the gun ownership and hate law reforms passed by Australia's parliament after the Bondi attack. To learn more about all of this, we reached out to Daniel Losurdo, a reporter with the Sydney Morning Herald. He began by explaining federal gun law reforms passed in Australia's parliament about 2 weeks ago.
Established a gun buyback scheme which will allow gun owners who have essentially too many guns that exceeds the new laws the ability to return their guns to the government to be destroyed. There'll also be new tweaks in the legislation which will allow federal intelligence agencies a better ability to share information with the states and territories when firearm licenses are issued, so they're all aware of who has guns and how many guns each license holder has. And crucially as well, non-citizens will be now barred from buying guns. That is relevant because the slain gunman Sajid Akram at Bondi, he was not an Australian citizen. He came to Australia from India in 1998, but never received a citizenship. And he legally owned 6 guns, the long arms used in Bondi.
15 people died and dozens more were injured at the shooting in December. I'm curious, does the public feel that Australia's existing gun laws at the time failed, or that enforcement was the issue rather than the legislation itself?
Australia's gun laws, even before the Bondi terror attack, appeared to be the envy of the world. So the fact that, these gun laws allowed Sajid Akram and Naveed Akram to legally hold 6 guns while living in suburban Sydney, that shocked a lot of people. There is certainly a level of frustration that these men were allowed to hold six long-arm rifles. They weren't farmers. They had no reason for so many guns in a residential street. But at the same time, I think there is an overwhelming sense of grief that this could happen. The concept of feeling unsafe while at the beach on a summer evening is so foreign to the Australian way of life. I think a lot of people are still grappling with exactly what happened at Bondi on December 14.
So in addition to changes to gun laws, there have also been changes to Australia's hate crime legislation in response to the Bondi attacks. Can you walk us through those changes?
Yeah, so in the days after Bondi, Federal Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke signalled these new hate crime laws, signalled that they will be extremely strict, that they will test for the limits of the Australian Constitution, and they were passed. Key components of the new hate crime laws is that a new hate group listing has been created for organisations that advocate for hate crimes but don't reach that threshold to be prescribed a terror organisation. Really strict penalties as well. So leaders of those groups in question could face up to 15 years in prison if found guilty under those new laws, and it has already had an effect. The neo-Nazi National Socialist Network, which is the preeminent neo-Nazi group in Australia, they received legal advice which led to their shutdown as a group, so they've formally disbanded.
Is anyone raising concerns about free speech with this tightening of hate crime laws?
Certainly, particularly in New South Wales, there has been laws passed which have effectively banned or suspended moving protests on the streets of Sydney in the wake of Bondi. That's been strongly contested by pro-Palestinian groups and other pro-protest groups, if you like.
So protest marches, for example, have been banned in Sydney since the Bondi shootings?
It's only banned now in the northern streets of the CBD and the eastern suburbs where Bondi is. So it's not as uniform as it was in the weeks after Bondi. In the weeks after Bondi, it was a whole Sydney metropolitan area.
This all comes as I mentioned, Israel's President Isaac Herzog is set to arrive in Sydney this weekend. What will he be doing there? I understand mourning alongside Australians.
That's right. He's expected to arrive on Sunday for a 5-day trip, although the details of his trip have been shrouded in secrecy. He's expected to start in Sydney and then progress to Canberra and Melbourne. It comes as a 19-year-old teenager from Sydney was charged with making online threats to kill Herzog while on his visit to Sydney. So there's been obviously a lot of controversy around this visit, given he's a central figure in the Israeli government, which has attracted global condemnation for their actions in Gaza. He's a controversial figure in Sydney in Australia, and there's a very, very tight security presence expected to make sure the Israeli president is safe while touring the country.
So what does it feel like in Australia right now? It sounds kind of like tensions are a bit high.
Certainly, I think in the days after, and indeed for probably fortnight after the terror attack, I think all Australians were consumed by this grief and this heartbreak about what happened at Bondi. But there has been a very real and significant opposition towards a lot of these laws that have been passed, concerns about free speech. There has been concern from some gun owners too about their rights. So I would say there has been definitely a rising of tension in the past few weeks, certainly in the new year. And I think the presence of the Israeli president will fuel those flames to a certain extent. Of course, this is a man that isn't necessarily popular among the Australian population, especially among the non-Jewish population. There are nationwide protests scheduled on Monday evening, our time. It's something to watch this space, but we'll see. Hopefully it plays out in a peaceful and productive manner.
Daniel Losurdo is a reporter at the Sydney Morning Herald. The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.